August is coming to a close, and maybe none too soon. It'll go down in the record books as Chicago's deadliest month in nearly 20 years. More than 400 people were shot and almost 80 killed. The escalating violence is just one of the issues facing Mayor Rahm Emanuel, from a federal probe into a police department trying to regain the public's trust to the threat of yet another teacher's strike, as you just heard, at the cash-strapped Chicago Public Schools. Joining us to talk about all of this is Mayor Rahm Emanuel. Mayor, welcome back to Chicago Tonight.
Thank you, Paris.
Mayor, you're proposing a new police oversight agency, COPA, the Civilian Office of Police Accountability. How will this agency be different than what exists now, IPRA?
Well, just give you two examples. One is beyond police use of force. We'll also deal with constitutional issues, proper search and seizures type of thing. You'll also have an inspector general who will oversee COPA and be able to look into both COPA. They'll be able to look into the police board. So somebody will be watching the accountability and the investigatory entity of COPA. So those are two just examples of types of reforms, and it's not just kind of picking up IPRA and saying it's now COPA. I think if you go back in history, when IPRA was established in 2007 and pulled out of the OIG's office, the Internal Affairs office in the police department, I think the intentions were, and that was an outgrowth of the Abadi scandal that happened in 2007 in the Chicago Police Department. The intention was to have an independent entity to do work that was independent in the oversight. I think it was an attempt to do that. I think it was all in good purposes, and the intention was earnest. I don't think there was the cultural change as well. And so you can establish this, expand some of the authority, like we had just mentioned on the constitutional issues, have an inspector general in general, totally new, also look into that work that they're doing. But I think one of the things that I want to also see is not just new rules, but a cultural change. And I think you can already see that by Sharon Farrelly and what she's done in a short period of time at IPRA.
At the same time, the city's law department drew up this ordinance, and there won't be a separate legal counsel in this new agency. So how is it any more independent if it's still going to rely on the law department?
Well, let me say a couple things here, Paris. We just introduced the ordinance. It is a product of a long process to get here, both through the task force and also city council, also a lot of meetings, but there were 13 public meetings in this effort. We just put it out. I'm not going to sit here and litigate and negotiate. One of the good part is not only is the product built where I think a lot of input from a lot of different voices, but it was also a process in which we built a lot of trust and a lot of capability of collaboration. So I'm not going to litigate every little point here and negotiate publicly, because I don't think that's true to the spirit of the way we've worked.
So there's still things up for negotiation on this?
Well, obviously, I mean, like even some people as recently as yesterday asked for more time. So I'm not going to let the 2 additional weeks get in the way of trying to get a good reform in the end of the day. So we've agreed to more time. My one thing is, what is the end goal? The end goal is to have an independent entity that has oversight to make sure that there's integrity in the work that the police are doing. There's another set of eyes there, and that in fact that we, in that process of an independent oversight, as it relates to police use of force and other issues, that people regain the trust they have in the Chicago Police Department, and that trust is an essential foundational piece to public safety.
Why should people be certain that this agency is going to be independent from your office or from the law department? Well,
I think, first of all, one of the big changes here is you now have an inspector general, Paris, who will be looking into their work. You never had that before. So somebody's actually keeping eyes on them and making sure that their investigations were done appropriately. So I think if you think of that in that effort, and you take a look at Sharon Farrelly. I mean, she's a new person. She's turned the page, and she's trying to do exactly the type of work that you need for the integrity for the police department work to be done, but also the public to know that somebody's watching them. Now, I want to take one step back. What is the whole purpose here besides ultimately the trust that I think is for safety? Police officers are the only people we give the authority and the responsibility to use force and take somebody else's life. As a civil society, we have to make sure there's all those checks and balances that are in place. That's essential that somebody feels like, we're giving you this responsibility and this authority, there's a set of eyes making sure it's not being abused in any way. Ultimately, if there's trust between the public and the police, that becomes greater cooperation. Like you saw this weekend, given, I think, the incredible work the detectives did on a horrible crime that happened over this weekend. Because they worked with officers.
You're speaking of Nakia Aldridge.
The Aldridge case. The detectives did great work, and they did great work because they also had good dialogue and partnership with the community. Trust is part of that. My fervent hope, and I want to kind of take to another subject, because ultimately this is all about public safety. It's not just trust for the sake of trust, although that's important. I want to have a discussion where we're making the changes and doing it because reform is important. It's important for that trust as a component of public safety, but not allow the debate to devolve where we demonize police. Because police are an essential part of the public safety. If you get to a place where we demonize them and it's about them, they're the problem, and they're not part of sitting at the table and being part of the solution, you're going to get reactive police work, not proactive community police work. And that has a problem on public safety.
The mayor made waves this week by rejecting his own police board's chosen finalist for police superintendent and going with 27-year CPD veteran Eddie Johnson instead. This at a critical juncture for the department where police morale is down, homicides are up, and misconduct is front and center. Here to talk about all of that and more issues that the city faces is Mayor Rahm Emanuel. Mayor Emanuel, thank you for being here.
Good evening, Paris. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Good.
In the past, you've decried the culture of the police department, specifically the code of silence. How is a 27-year police veteran the right person to fix all of that?
Well, first of all, he's exactly the right person. I think if you look at his record throughout, he has built the trust with the community. That's essential. He has shown through his career where he has earned his promotions. He will inspire the rank and file to be their best and to act their best. And I actually think, we're working with the Justice Department. There's a task force I've put together. As he said yesterday in his own words, that is in our self-interest. We're going to implement those reforms. And because of his leadership, he will be able to get the trust of the rank and file to adopt those changes because they're necessary, they're important, and it's in the self-interest of building the trust that's so important for the community to work with the police officers.
He says we'll fix the problems if there indeed are problems. Do you really think he believes there might not be problems in the police department?
He knows about it. He spoke to it, I think, quite clearly and directly. And also he'll hold people accountable. But part of what is essential for public safety is a community that works with the department. I've seen Eddie Johnson from the 6th District on the south side, who took on the gangs and reduced gun violence, rise through merit and through his accomplishments to Area Central, then to EXO, and ultimately head of, in chief of patrol, the largest division. Now think about this. This is an individual who has garnered the support of Father Flagler and other religious leaders, the rank and file of the police department, and the head of the police union. When you usually get people of that disparate views having consensus about one individual, I think he has the chops to make the changes that are necessary and also communicate to the rank and file, this is in their self-interest. And I think, I was up with him right before we went downstairs to announce. He spoke to the command staff. He said, we're not going to ask rank and file to wear body cams if we don't. I'm going to wear one, and to commanders, I'm going to ask you to do it because we're going to lead from the front. That's exactly the type of changes and the way to lead those changes that I think he has the right character and the right stuff to actually make the changes that are necessary to build the trust with the community. He's done it through his whole life and his whole career in the police department.
And you mentioned you've watched his career. Why not just name him interim superintendent when Gary McCarthy left? Why wait until now?
Well, John Escalante stepped up, was the first deputy, and I want to say John, both through his dedication, his discipline, I think led with dignity at a very difficult time, and I think he did the right things. But when I look at the challenges, meaning the morale in the police department, as you noted, gang and gun violence is up and morale is down, and they're related. And I also look at what it takes to build trust. And I look at somebody who can lead from the front and inspire the troops and inspire the best from the rank and file of the police department. Eddie Johnson's the right person at the right time with the right stuff.
When did your staff or you first reach out to Eddie Johnson about the superintendent position specifically?
A little over a week ago.
And he didn't apply. Did you have to convince him that he was ready for this job?
No, I don't. Let me say it was interesting in the conversation when we met in my office. I said, Eddie, why didn't you apply? And when he said, which he said yesterday, out of respect for John Escalante, actually my respect for him and his character went up, even though I had a very high regard for him. I think it shows why people in the department, command staff, people on the north side, south side, west side, throughout the department, rank and file of all likes, know that he's the right person at the right time. I think his saying that he didn't apply and why he didn't apply out of respect for John Escalante speaks volumes of who he is, which is why he can garner support from people of different views who don't usually agree, but agree on Eddie Johnson.
As you know, there are reports out there that you initially offered the job to Cedric Alexander out of Georgia, and then you rescinded it. Why did you change your mind on him?
Well, first of all, you assume that to be true.
It's not true. He said this. He's not telling the truth.
Paris, I was a party to the conversation. No, I offered the job to one person. That's Eddie Johnson.
There's little progress out of Springfield on a budget or funding for education, but there sure are a lot of words being hurled back and forth between Governor Rauner and the mayor, Emanuel, likening his one-time friend to Donald Trump. Rauner calling Emanuel his, quote, biggest disappointment, as you just heard. Perhaps another disappointment is the city's high homicide numbers this year. It just finished the worst May for homicides in 21 years. Joining us to wade through all these issues is Mayor Emanuel. Mayor Emanuel, thank you for being here again.
Thank you, Paris.
I want to start with some national politics. You heard at the top of the show that Senator Kirk is not going to support Donald Trump for president. Are you surprised by that?
Well, thousands and millions of people in Illinois are not going to support Donald Trump. He has the wrong policies, the wrong temperament to lead the country. And I think that what Donald Trump has said, not just recently, if you look at what he said over the last 9 months, is millions of people in Illinois and across the country are not going to support him because he does not have the temperament, the ideas to lead this country forward. Senator Kirk will obviously made whatever decision he's going to make, but I think that's going to be the decisions of millions and millions of people for the right reason.
Not to drag your family name into this, but your brother Ari Emanuel, Trump characterizes him as a good friend. Do you ever talk to your brother about Trump? Do you disagree on him?
Well, let me just say this. I don't know how Donald Trump refers to Ari, but I know how Ari's going to vote in November, and it won't be with Donald Trump.
So they're not good friends. Well, they probably won't be after November then.
I don't really, that's not for me. I don't even know if they're good friends or not, but I know what Ari's values are, and I know how my mother and father raised him, and I know what he's going to do this election, and he's going to vote for Hillary Clinton.
Let's get to these issues we talked about at the top. Is there a crisis right now of principals leaving CPS because of the budget impasse?
Well, look, this is how I would look at it, Paris, and I think Janice Jackson, Chief Education Officer, said that we're not going to have more principals leaving than before, other times. It comes on the heels, though, also, which is something that people should be take note of. The University of Chicago just released a study showing that we're hitting record high graduations in Chicago, historic highs, and our freshman and sophomore classes are on track to reach over 80%. Just a few years ago, it was 56%. That's tremendous growth. And at the national average, 42% of high school kids go on to college. Chicago kids is 40%. We're now tracking the national number, and our demographics are different than the country as a whole. That's really great news. And the reason we're getting that is our school principals. Now, they have a lot of challenges educationally. They should not have an extra burden on the finances. And the uncertainty, while it's not reached a level of a crisis, is a burden that should not be put on our school principals, like our teachers who are doing a tremendous job, which is why Illinois must meet its primary function of funding primary education.
How is Illinois going to do that? Will it be with a temporary budget? Will it be with a standalone education budget? Will it be with that budget that Mike Madigan pushed through the House? Well,
look, what I do know is not just funding education. You have to, in this year, reverse decades of inequitable and inadequate education funding. And that is what the budget did that was passed out of the House.
But it wasn't paid for.
And it was also education bill out of the Senate.
But how could someone in good conscience support something that's $7 billion out of whack and say this is a good plan?
Well, first of all, I'll tell you what I see in the education part of the budget, okay? You asked me about education. That is a primary function of the state. One, for Illinois, you've heard me talk about this, but it's very important. We are 48th out of 50 states in funding education. And we double the problem when we actually put more resources towards school districts with wealthy students and penalize school districts with poverty or students of poverty across the state. And that budget reverses both the inadequate and inequitable funding. And I believe that's the right thing to do in the sense of education funding. There's a compromise to work out.
There have to be tax revenue to pay for part of that.
The governor and the speaker, I mean, the toughest issue is people have already agreed there has to be revenue. What's holding everything up is this additional burden that's being put on the budget called the turnaround agenda. Governor Edgar has said, put that aside. Others have both heard, put it aside. We've never gone 19 months without passing a budget.